Hello, my name is David Bruce. So Oblique Strategies is a series of cards created by composer Brian Eno along with Peter Schmidt in the 1970s as a creative aid. So the idea is that if you find yourself creatively stuck, you take a card and it gives you a slightly ambiguous statement or idea which might help you out of your creative block. And thanks to Steve Gould in the comments for reminding me of this. These cards are actually really good, and I just wanted to give you my thoughts about a few of them, just because they touch on some really important aspects of creativity which don't often get talked about. But of course their main purpose is to give you ways to break out of creative ruts, look at things afresh, or try things you've never tried before. So you should definitely look at them for yourselves and come up with your own responses. These are just a few of mine. Breathe more deeply. That's quite an interesting notion to apply to a piece of music. Perhaps an interesting test to apply to music that you've written. How does it breathe? In what manner does it breathe? Is it overexcited? Is it slow and powerful? Could something that goes at a fast pace have a deep breath? So maybe it would feel like an enormous, powerful creature. I suppose what I'm saying is that the breath of a piece isn't necessarily the same as the rhythm or the speed of the notes going by. Here's a section from my piece Groanbox. You can hear that the main line on the violin is reasonably active, but then at a much slower level of movement there is this kind of breathing in and out on the accordion that keeps returning. And this kind of slow rate of breath gives the piece an incredibly relaxed feel, even as the surface of the melody gets more active. I think these things often relate to our bodies. We're moving around at various speeds, but we also have our rate of breathing which may or may not relate to that speed. And I think at quite an instinctive level we perceive different things about a situation based on the relationship with these two different rates. They can imply a different kind of mood, or even make it feel like it's a different kind of creature that's operating. Don't be afraid of things because they're easy to do. Well, I really like this one. We're taught we have to be clever all the time, and I've had to really learn to allow myself to be not clever in music sometimes. There's never a direct link between the amount of work you put in and the end result. Sometimes something that took you 3 seconds can be amazing, and something you slaved over for a year can be a load of rubbish. So definitely don't be afraid of things just because they're easy to do. We like to think of ourselves as being in control of things when we're creating our art. We're expressing ourselves. But I often think that what makes art interesting is the parts that just come out without the artist trying. The parts they're maybe even ashamed of or trying to hide from others. And something that comes out easily is often coming from that kind of place. Change instrument roles. This is definitely one that I often say to composers when I'm giving them advice. A less experienced student will often try to use instruments sensibly, doing what they're supposed to do. I suppose it's quite a scary thing to try to push beyond those norms. You don't want to look like an idiot. So you might just put everything in the middle register, stay away from the extremes, do what the instrument's supposed to do. So this strategy is excellent. Give the double bass the melody line, make the violin do the accompaniment, give a melodic instrument a rhythm or a rhythmic instrument a melody, and so on. Look at the order in which you do things. Overall, I would say it's a very good strategy to be self-aware. Well, to some extent at least. Some things are perhaps better left in the subconscious. But you definitely can get stuck into patterns of behaviour in the way you write and create. And some of those patterns might not be that helpful. Perhaps you're the sort of person who plans things out in advance. Or maybe you should just try writing and trying to work out the structure later. Or perhaps you only orchestrate a piece at the very end. Maybe you should try making the orchestration a crucial part of the piece from the very beginning. It's actually hard for me in my own creative process to think about things that I might change or do differently. Most of the time I'm just using some of those tricks in my Composing Hacks video as a way of just trying to break the deadlock at the start of a piece. Destroy nothing or destroy the most important thing. Destroying the most important thing is an interesting one. You might also say let go of the things you love. It might be true, I think, when the things you love come from somewhere else. So for example, Olivier Messiaen, I know he admired and loved his French predecessor, Claude Debussy. In fact, you can see how much he loves him in this charming archive footage from Messiaen's masterclasses in Paris, where he's analysing Debussy's opera Pelléas and Mélisande. I'll link it below. And yet Messiaen never used the harp in any of his pieces. It was almost like he was taking this quintessentially coloristic Debussyan idea, something I'm sure he loved, and put it to one side. That's not going to be for me. It was a way of separating himself from the things he loved. So to that extent I agree with this, but when it comes to your own music and the things you love, I think it's harder to think that this is right, because the things you love are what make your work unique. So if I was going to apply this to my own work, destroy the things I love, destroy instrumental colour, destroy playful rhythms, well, I don't know how much there would be left. Maybe this one should be rephrased as destroy the influences you love. So if I was to instead try to destroy the influence of, say, Stravinsky on my music, well, that feels like a much more intriguing and stimulating suggestion. And the other part, destroy nothing, well, I very rarely find I use old things unless I'm absolutely desperate. So for me, destroying nothing seems a little bit excessive. But if you do follow that strategy, I would say make sure you have a very good filing system so you can work out where all the things are that you didn't destroy. Remove specifics and convert to ambiguities. I've certainly noticed this working in opera and in song, that it can be very powerful if you only give a hint of something rather than the full idea. You know, allowing the space for the audience to bring their own interpretation, and then they often feel that they've reacted more powerfully when the ideas come from themselves rather than being sort of spoon-fed it. In terms of music, well, what is specific as opposed to ambiguous? Is it a clear statement of a theme or a melody? Is music better with obvious things removed? I mean, that's quite a sort of old-fashioned modernist approach to things. When I was a student, it always felt like everything had to be in transition, so you could never make a big, bold statement. I was always pushing against that. So musically speaking, I'm not sure about this concept. But again, it's still an interesting point to contemplate. Distorting time. So I can definitely relate to that one a lot, because that's basically what music is. It's really fascinating to me how music can distort time. A 2-minute piece can seem to last an eternity, or a long piece can whiz by. Or within an individual moment, a beat that has a lot going on in it has a different sense of time than a beat that's empty. I actually once tried to write a piece along these lines, where I took a really long downbeat, I think it was 5 seconds, and then within that try all sorts of different ways of moving, different subdivisions, and I even had accelerandi and ritardandi to see if that changed the way we perceived the 5-second beat. So perhaps yes, as a strategy sometimes, if you're not sure what you're doing, just try seeing if you can distort time somehow. Mechanicalise something idiosyncratic. I think that pretty much sums up what I do all the time. Turn it upside down. I heard that in copyright law, if you turn a melody upside down, it's treated as unrelated. It's a completely new melody. Don't hold me to that, by the way. So melodies are one thing, of course, you can flip upside down, but it's interesting to think what else you could turn upside down. It relates perhaps to that one about making instruments do the opposite, so perhaps a whole texture could be turned upside down, or a whole rhythm, or a structure. So just trying to apply one of these strategies to different areas can be really stimulating. Water. That's the strategy, water. Well, hydration's certainly important. I'm certainly aware as I get older that the brain is a fragile organ, and keeping it in good order through exercise, sleep, lack of alcohol and hydration are all things that I should do and probably don't do enough of. Sorry, Mum. Allow an easement. An easement is the abandonment of a stricture. So we're usually told that imposing limitations on yourself is the best way to stimulate creativity. You know, you have too many choices, you get suffocated by all the possibilities, whereas if you limit yourself to a tiny subset of possibilities, you're much more likely to bounce off the walls and come up with stuff. So this one's turning that idea on its head. Maybe you've taken that idea of rules and restrictions too far, and there's perhaps something that you could abandon. On the whole, I feel like I don't have enough strictures in my music. I don't impose enough rules. I always struggle to turn them into something I really believe in, even though I've seen that limitations and strictures work really well in many creative situations. So for me, finding strictures I can actually use in my composing would be a better strategy for me. Is the intonation correct? Well, see my video on the 12 Shades of Grey for more about that. Into the impossible. Yeah, don't be afraid to do something just because it's impossible. I liked Ben Levin's videos recently where he deliberately was writing impossible music using MuseScore. Certainly keeping yourself within the limitations of the instrument can be quite restricting sometimes, and it's often good just to write what you want, even if it's impossible, because you want to allow that state of creative flow to carry on as freely as possible. And then you can always come back to it later and make it possible. So that's one practical interpretation of this strategy. I'm sure there are other things to think about that would be impossible, but which could be fruitful to look into. You don't have to be ashamed of using your own ideas. This one I really love. You know, we find ourselves with a concept of how an artist behaves. Even some of my mentors, I see them looking back to their own inspirations, and that their work is clearly modelled on these early inspirations. Inevitable in some ways. But I've noticed myself sometimes validating an idea because I can see it in someone else's work in a way that I would much less likely do if it was just purely my own idea. Whereas of course it's probably the opposite is more true. We should explore ways of being an artist that aren't imitating, trying to be the next Beethoven, but being, you know, the first you. If you do it right, composers in the future will be trying to imitate what you've done, but only if you have your own ideas, so don't be afraid to use them. Emphasize differences. Try bringing out the most extreme version of whatever it is you're doing. Try to work out exactly what it is that you're doing in the first place, and then try to fulfill it to the biggest, largest degree. So I guess emphasizing differences is another way of thinking about that same idea. Take away the elements in order of apparent non-importance. That's quite an interesting idea. Think about what in your music is the least important. Could your music do without it? Kind of that less is more kind of thing. I guess it doesn't help you get started, but if you've already got something and you're not quite happy with it, try taking something away from it and seeing what happens. Decorate, decorate. So again, what's superfluous and what's the decoration in your piece? How important is decoration? Now, it's easy to think that decoration is just surface and it's not the important thing. I remember, I think it was Yo-Yo Ma who said that the things that separate different cultures is the decoration or the ornamentation. The same scales exist all over the world in different cultures. The thing that defines them and distinguishes them is the decoration. So you can see that decoration is actually really important. So think about exactly what kind of decoration your music has or should have. Tidy up. So how does your working environment relate to your creativity? Again, it's worth a bit of self-observation to work this out. I have quite an interesting relationship to tidying. Certainly when I'm in the middle of a big piece, it's hard to find the space in my head to tidy. Somehow it feels like my creativity takes place within that mess. But then every now and then I have a big tidy up, and that can also help as well to sort of have a clarity. But I always like the idea that Einstein had a messy desk. So I hope this was useful to you, whatever kind of musical creativity you're involved in. I do give feedback on pieces on the top level of my Patreon. There are a couple of spots still open in that, and for anyone who signs up this month, I'll throw in a new copy of my new CD, which comes out at the end of August. I'll tell you more about that soon. Thanks so much for watching. Do please like and subscribe and share with your friends, and I'll see you next time.